If you're a doctor thinking of working either in Australia or in New Zealand and can't decide which one is best for you, then this video is for you. We'll be covering how easy it is to get jobs, what residency training looks like, and how much you get paid as a doctor working here. Today, I've invited Dr. Adam Rushford, who is a doctor working in Melbourne. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. And today we're going to talk about the differences between being a doctor in Australia versus a doctor in New Zealand.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm Adam. I'm a junior doctor based in Melbourne, Australia. I'm currently PGY2 and I'm working in a largish health network in a tertiary hospital in Melbourne, Australia. I'm also in my first year of BPT, basic physician training we call it here, which essentially means it's the first year of general training for some of the physician specialties within medicine.
That's really cool. You're in BPT, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so just started this year, but from what I've learned, actually BPT in Victoria is a little bit different. It's a little bit different to how some of the other states work, in the sense that a lot of other states you've got to be PGY3 and upwards, but here we have accredited rotation starting in PGY2. So I'm not necessarily working as a registrar this year, but also just rotating through some of the different specialty medical rotations and general medicine as well.
That's cool, Adam, because that was what I was going to comment on, because I'm PGY4, so 4 years out of medical school. So I work at Christchurch Hospital, but I've actually only worked 3 years. So in terms of my knowledge and experience, I'm a PGY3, because I took a gap year last year. But I've also applied for physician training this year, so I'm in my first year as well. But in New Zealand, you have to be a registrar or sort of PGY3 onwards before you can apply for physician training. So it's cool that you guys can have accredited rotations already when you're PGY2.
It's a cool opportunity, and I think a good chance to get a breadth of different experience in different rotations and be part of that BPT process. It's been good so far.
So have you honed down on medicine now? You're not interested in surgery or?
I would say surgery's firmly ruled out at this stage. Medicine is definitely the thing that I'm leading with at the moment. Look, I'm still kind of early days in my career decision making, we'll call it, but I'm doing a gastro rotation at the moment and really enjoying that. How about you? Where are you at with things?
I just started my registrar role this year. So I'm in general medicine and it's a 4-month rotation. I've got 3 rotations this year. First one is general medicine relief. So I'm a reliever for anyone who calls sick or have annual leave. I cover them in general medicine. And then I've got geriatrics coming up, as well as another medical relief run. So lots of relief runs, which isn't really ideal for training, but really good money though, so I'm not complaining. We're going to talk about salary and things as well at the end of the video, so we'll make sure that we keep our audience on their toes, because that's probably the juicy part that people want to know, hey?
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to sort of discuss what happens after medical school. I don't know much about what happens after medical school in Australia.
Once you graduate from medical school, you'll work as an intern essentially, which is the most junior position as a doctor can be in the hospital. And in Victoria, that's a 1-year role at the moment. I think they're looking to increase it to a 2-year required thing in order to get your full registration. And when you're an intern, you're essentially on provisional registration, but what that means is you just have to fulfill the requirements throughout your intern year to achieve general registration.
I was going to just quickly clarify a thing that you mentioned. So provisional registration, is that just 1 year in Australia?
Typically 1 year.
1 year.
Typically 1 year. At least in Victoria it is. Yeah.
Okay. So your internship is PGY1?
Your internship is PGY1, which you're contracted to that one hospital.
Okay.
In other states, you might have a PGY1 and a PGY2 contract where you're obliged to complete both of those contracts with the same hospital.
So I just wanted to get that correct. We use similar terms but for different meanings in New Zealand. Medical school is a 6-year degree. So the first year is pre-medicine, which kind of doesn't really count as medical school. It's pre-medicine, but a prerequisite for medical school. And then 2 years of preclinical and 3 years of clinical. So when you're a 4th and 5th year, you're still a student, but then in your 6th year, you're called a trainee intern. You're technically still under the medical school, but you're expected to work similar hours as a junior doctor. Okay. You still have rotations, and when you go to those rotations, you're attached to a team. And whenever that team is on call, you're on call as well with your team. So if you have a 15-hour long day, you have to go to those 15-hour long days. So it's not a paid role, but it's a requirement. But they do allocate you like a scholarship. I think that's something like 20K for the whole year. Then once you graduate from medical school, we've got a matching sort of system. It's a national program and it's called ACE. What happens is you write down your top 10 preferences. You need to write like a cover letter and your CV. You don't have interviews, and they try to match you as closely as possible to your preferences. But yeah, it's pretty much guaranteed that everyone gets a job. It's just depending on your preferences, you might not get the hospital that you want. Then you start work, and that's 2 years of provisional registration, Adam. So PGY1 and PGY2. So every hospital usually contracts for 2 years. Then you can apply for general registration. I think we have a more drawn out sort of longer safety netting of like the students before they get sent out to look after patients and they're on their own sort of thing.
So interesting. I didn't know that you kind of had that 6 year kind of commitment where you had to really follow the team so closely and work so many hours. That definitely wasn't the case, I guess, in Australian medical schools. I know that typically in the final year, you are a little bit more tied down. You commit a bit more hours to the hospital and to your team, but there's definitely no kind of expectation like that or requirement. Generally speaking, when you're in your final year of medical school, you start applying for intern positions in hospitals around the country or around the state that you're applying in. You'll put in 6 to 8 different preferences of different hospitals you'd like to work in, and you'll rank them from 1 to 8, and then you'll be put through a system that kind of organizes all of your preferences. Then you'll sit a standardized interview with a few different pre-recorded questions. You also send in a CV. So they review your CV, they review your responses to the interview, and then some hospitals will also send out an additional kind of interview as well. Victoria is probably one of the last remaining merit-based systems in terms of how you get allocated a role as a doctor in a hospital, at least coming from medical school. A lot of the other states, you'll put in a preference list and they'll kind of just randomly try to match you to a hospital system with the aim of trying to give you your highest preference, but with no kind of guarantee and no kind of other external factors like an interview or a CV. Also, you mentioned in terms of applicants guaranteed a job at the end of it. If you're a domestic applicant who has studied medicine in the state that you're applying for a job in, you're more or less guaranteed a position. And for international students, that might not be the case. And positions are often quite competitive to get as an international student applying for a PGY1 position out of medical school, particularly in metropolitan hospitals. So that is definitely another factor to consider. And also if you're a student who has maybe moved interstate for medical school and wants to move back home, you're also a lower priority when applying from an interstate medical school back to another state. Each state's kind of differ in terms of how they preference different students, but that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Okay, interstate. So every state has its own recruitment system, it sounds like.
Every state is, completely independent from the other when it comes to recruiting.
We're quite lucky then in New Zealand that if you want to move back home, it's relatively straightforward because in your cover letter you just say, hey, like, I want to move back home. And they're like, okay, well, they definitely take that into consideration and gives you brownie points to allocate you to the hospital where your home is.
Yeah.
So very different. International medical students have a hard time finding a job in New Zealand compared to the domestic students. So as I said, everyone is basically like guaranteed a job after they come out, but international students, even though they graduate in the same year, the domestic students will take preference. And once everyone is allocated a job, then they'll look at the international students who haven't got a job yet and then see, where the gaps are. So often we find that international students, because I've got a lot of friends who are international students, they will want to go to a bigger centre, but they can't because they've all sort of been taken up by local students. So they have to apply for smaller centres and actually wait for a little bit longer to then apply after everyone's got a job. Unfortunately, that's how the matching system works in New Zealand. My friends who are all international students eventually all have a job. It just sort of depends on how long you're willing to wait out for a little bit, and if you're happy to go to a rural centre in the first few years of working first and then apply to a bigger centre when you finish your provisional registration.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like a pretty similar process. Yeah, it's definitely a few more hoops to jump through, which I think is a bit of a shame. You end up going through the same medical school process. You often end up wanting to work in the same place for a long time and have a secure job like everyone else. But yeah, just one of those unfortunate kind of caveats to the system.
And the next question I wanted to ask is, do you know what the pathway is for international medical graduates? So these are not the international medical students. So these are graduates from other countries who've already graduated from their medical school to try apply for hospital jobs in Australia. Do you know what the pathway for that is?
Yeah, so vaguely speaking, you need a medical degree from an accredited institution from another country. And then you typically, depending on which kind of country you've come from, sometimes you might need to sit an additional exam and go through the AMC, the Australian Medical Council, to be able to get accreditation to work in Australia. So that for a lot of international students is the primary hurdle when coming in. And often you'll come in similar to an intern in the sense that you'll have a provisional or conditional registration for a short period of time until you pass the primary AMC exam. Although I will say that I probably oversimplified that in the sense that becoming a doctor in Australia and having graduated overseas can be a very complex and lengthy process. It's probably worth looking into the intricacies a little bit more. But I know that a lot of people do it and a lot of people come to Australia. Eventually they end up working, which is great.
That's awesome. Do you see a lot of international medical graduates at your hospital? Is it quite common to see them around?
Quite common, yeah. I think obviously the UK being one country where it's a lot easier to gain work from. You see a lot of junior doctors from the UK coming over, but also a lot of doctors coming in from Southeast Asia and from the subcontinent and from different parts of the world who are looking to get a job in Australia as well. And quite a few have ended up working in our health network, which is great.
That's really cool. I asked that because, Adam, there's not many IMGs in our hospital, and the reason being is that it's very difficult for IMGs to get a job in New Zealand. I feel like that's one of the biggest caveats really, is that New Zealand is always needing doctors, but there's this huge bottleneck of not utilising IMGs who are really, really keen to apply for a job in New Zealand, but not being able to get one because of all these extra hoops and steps that they have to take. They're so qualified compared to like a PGY1 or PGY2. Most of these doctors who apply are already in their 30s or 40s, preparing for consultancy or have been halfway through their training program, but having to come here and then be treated like a PGY1 all over again. Because I think the pathway is very similar in that you have to do provisional training first. And the exam here is called the NZREX exam. If you're not from any of the 4 countries, so if you're not from UK, Australia or Ireland, 3 countries, you basically have to sit the NZREX. In order to sit the NZREX, you have to have all these other qualifications first. You can't just have worked as a doctor. So things like PLAB, USMLE, AMC, those sort of exam qualifications first before you're allowed to even sit the NZREX. So there's lots of hoops, which makes it really hard for these doctors to come over to New Zealand to even be able to help with the shortages, in my opinion, which is a real shame. But I do have to say that looking at the statistics recently, most people are allocated a job after they've set the NZREX and try to apply for a hospital. It's just that the duration of time that they have to wait after they've set the exam until they get their first job is quite long, something an average of about 100 days to 300 days. And, understandably, coming from overseas to New Zealand, which has a really high cost of living, and not having a job, it's hard. I hope that the payout for them is worth it though when they're here. because it's a beautiful country and the work culture here is definitely much better, I would say, compared to overseas.
It sounds like a really, really difficult process to be able to come and work, which is, it's a real shame.
Adam, I know that you're on call today. I'm very, very grateful that you've jumped on this call with me. So I just wanted to ask you, what does a day in your life as a doctor typically looks like? Is it something like today?
So I guess I can give you a bit of a run through of a typical day when I'm not on call, because I guess most of the days I'm not on call, I'm working in the hospital. So at the moment I'm currently on a gastroenterology rotation. I'm one of the residents on the gastro team in the hospital. And so I'll come into the hospital typically around 7:45 for around an 8 o'clock start, try to get in a little bit early. The first thing that you typically do in the mornings on a medical team at least is to do ward rounds. So you'll round on all the patients, which means you go around and you see all the patients that are allocated under your team. But before we start that, we prepare some of the notes for the day to make the rounds a bit more efficient. If there are any leftover jobs or tasks from the day before, we'll get them done. And I imagine this sort of thing is pretty relatable to most junior doctors, if not in New Zealand, probably around the world. A lot of the grunt work happens sort of early in the day and by the junior doctors. We'll go and do ward rounds, we'll see all the patients with either the registrar and the consultant. On gastro, that might finish around midday, maybe a little bit later if it's we got more patients that day. Then we'll do some of the urgent jobs, making referrals, sorting things out for patients that are getting discharged, responding to urgent pages. Then hopefully eat some lunch. Always eat some lunch. Maybe not always, but should always try and eat lunch. Definitely a big advocate for that. Not that I'm the best representative, but try and eat lunch and then continue on and try and do the little bits and pieces that need fixing up for patients throughout the day and responding to any sick patients if they need. So that would be the average day. But yeah, as you said, today I'm on call, which essentially means if anyone calls in sick from any of the kind of medical teams across the hospital, that I might be called in to replace them. So I'm keeping an eye on my phone, but so far so good and have not been called in yet, which is good news on a weekend like this.
Yeah, great. Yeah, having your fingers crossed.
Yeah. How about you? How does your day as a doctor look like?
I'm a medical registrar on the general medicine ward. So typically as a registrar, you probably rock into work around maybe 8 on the dot, which is quite nice. I would have a quick squiz of what's happened overnight on my phone while we're in the morning handover. There's a huge handover meeting starting at like 8:05 in the morning, where the night registrars who were admitting for general medicine would give us a handover of the patients that they've seen, as well as any sick patients overnight, and that goes on for about half an hour. After that, we go to ward round, and then do you guys do your own ward rounds as a resident?
It kind of depends what team you're in. On general medicine, often there'll be sort of a registrar and a consultant ward round. Some of the, I guess, more stable patients, you could say, are seen by the resident or PGY2, PGY3 resident. And so they might break away from the rounds to kind of see their own patients. But on gastro, usually it's a registrar or a consultant ward round.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really similar to New Zealand Hospital as well. Christchurch Hospital anyway. So in general medicine, it's usually the registrar who leads the ward rounds, unless it's a post-take, which is like the day after you've admitted new patients, then the consultant usually wants to see them because they're new patients under their name. Otherwise, I'll lead the ward round, and then that will hopefully finish before lunchtime. And then we'll endeavour to get lunch on time. After that, we'll go and do jobs, as you say, those urgent referrals, trying to get help from other specialties like gastro, for example, to consult on our own patients to get their advice. Not to mention paperwork. Paperwork is so important in the hospital setting. And then try to finish around 4. I would always tell my team every day, okay guys, we're finishing at 4 today, finishing at 4, but more often than not it's 4:30, 5 o'clock on a normal day, which is really not too bad compared to a lot of other hospitals that are more busy than we are. So that's what a typical day looks like. On-call days are a lot more hectic. So our on-call days are 15 hours long. So we start at 8 a.m. and we finish at 11 p.m. When you're on call in general medicine, it means that you're admitting patients, so admitting new patients under your team you still go ahead and do those normal jobs that you do, but at some point during the day, you're going to get called to go down to see patients who are really sick that needs to come under general medicine. That sort of fluctuates from a day-to-day basis depending on how busy you are, but it definitely gets really hectic around 11 a.m. and then you try to finish your ward jobs, and then you're also trying to attend to really sick patients in emergency department, and then somewhere along the lines you forget to have lunch, and then it's 3 p.m. you're like, gosh, it's 3 p.m. might as well wait till dinner time. And then when dinner time comes, that's when the peak of the patients come through as well, and you're like, whoops, I sort of missed out on dinner time. It's a bit chaotic like that, but if you have it all well planned and have takeaway meals ready to go as you're working, you can get through an on-call day all right, having yourself fed, which is always the goal when you have a busy day.
Those on-call days sound very hectic, and I can definitely relate to the aiming to finish on time, and then inevitably ward rounds running a little bit late, or things get in the way and you end up leaving the hospital a little bit later than you wanted to. In Australia, I think compared to a lot of other countries, working conditions, working hours obviously varies depending on where you work, but as a junior are getting a lot better now than they used to be. So yeah, very grateful and thankful for that, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We can be complaining here about how many hours we work, but honestly, when I was in Malaysia, I went overseas as part of my elective. Working with the junior doctors there, they were there at 5 a.m. preparing for the word round. I was like, did you guys even go back home? Because I remember that they were there till really, really late. It's just bizarre because for them, they're like, this is just my day-to-day, it's my norm. After that, I've just been really grateful for our hours working in New Zealand and Australia, which is one of the many reasons why IMGs want to work here, because of the working conditions. But Adam, speaking of which, you were mentioning about your hours and things. I was wondering what your long day hours look like.
So obviously I mentioned a typical kind of weekday day shift, as I said, around 8 a.m. to between 4, 5:30, 6 o'clock. Long days might be 8 a.m. sometimes till 10 p.m. So what's that? 14 hours. And then, they vary. Some other teams might have 10-hour shifts. It definitely changes depending on the team that you work on and how the roster kind of works. But often on weekends, you'll be working those longer sort of 14-hour shifts at a time.
When you say your long day shifts, are those rostered hours or...
Yeah, they're all rostered hours. Any overtime that you work that's rostered, you'll get paid for. And I guess overtime is a whole different topic in itself, but theoretically, every hour that you work overtime that isn't rostered, you may have the ability to claim that time as unpaid overtime. So you put in a form and essentially say that I've worked more hours than I should have. Your team may or may not approve that time and pay you additionally for that. But yeah, as I said, very variable. I will make the point that I think the stance and feelings toward paying overtime has changed a lot in the past few years in Australia. And I think a lot of hospitals are paying a lot more overtime than they used to, which is fantastic. And I think it's good from one point of view that you're, I guess, financially compensated for the time that you do work. But two, it also kind of creates a bit of a logging system of how many hours junior doctors are working, so that staffing can be allocated a bit more appropriately, or if one team's working a lot more hours than another team, they might try to roster an additional doctor on that team to kind of reduce the burden and make sure that people get home on time. So I think it's very important from that perspective. And for the most part, a lot of the teams that I have worked on have been open to paying overtime. It's generally getting a lot better, but it does kind of depend on the team and the hospital that you work at, I would say.
Okay, so that's really surprising, I guess, because in New Zealand, overtime is a bit of a sort of sensitive topic. Yes, we are allowed to apply for overtime. However, there's quite a bit of stigma around it at the moment, and I think it just have to do with the work culture. I think that still needs to change in medicine, that if you're working overtime, that sort of equates to you not doing your job properly. And that's completely false. We're an aging population and each patient has more and more comorbidities, and the workload has been increasing over time. So a department that used to have one gastro house officer when I was working there now has two gastro house officers. To be honest, I thought when I was the sole house officer on that run, I thought this is really tough. I was finishing at 6 p.m. every day on a normal day, and I was very stressed out every day. And then when I saw two house officers on that run, when I finished, because the next year was going to start and they allocated two house officers, I was fuming. I was like, oh my gosh, like how unfair is that? But that is what's needed, and we're able to reflect that the department is severely understaffed and increase the junior staff to 2 compared to 1. That is essentially why doctors should not feel ashamed about putting in their overtime hours, so then that correctly reflects the demand of the specialty. I'm still low-key pretty bitter about having to work a 2-person job by myself and not getting paid twice as much. But anyway, Adam, I wanted to ask you, how many hours would you work usually in 1 week?
If I had to give a number, it would be probably between 40 and 50 hours a week, which is, I think, relative to a lot of other, again, countries and health systems, that's pretty good. It's pretty normal, pretty protected. The caveat is that it varies depending on what rotation you're in, how well staffed it is, what hospital you're working in.
Okay. On days that you are working the weekend, so that would be Monday to Friday, and then you work the weekend, do you have to then come back to work the following week straight away, or do you get a bit of time off? I guess that's sort of my leading question to how many hours you work maximum in a week.
Maximum in a week. Yeah, so typically if you are on sort of those 7-day runs, you'll get a bit of an extended break on the end, which is nice. So after that, you won't necessarily be expected to go back on the Monday. However, having said that, if you're a registrar, it's a little bit different. This is probably just where I'm coming from a P2. If we have a 7-day run, generally we'll have a few days off after that to kind of recover. If I had to estimate a number of hours we'd work in kind of those 7 days on, it would maybe look a little more like 70 to 80 hours. But that's just purely because you've worked those extra days on the weekend.
Which days do you come back? Like, do you come back on the Wednesday, or how many days off do they give you for working a weekend?
Look, you'd probably get 4 days off, maybe come back on the Thursday. Our roster is so variable. Sometimes you'll start a new rotation after that week on and start back again on the Monday. It kind of depends, but I'd say on average, you'd get maybe 3, maybe something after that. I'd imagine as a registrar, your hours and expectations a little bit higher than maybe what mine would be. So I guess interested to hear how you've jumped up from being a house officer to a registrar.
In terms of the hours, we're the same actually, because we're under a MECA, so under this protection. I'm currently under the RDA, which is the Resident Doctor Association, and they've got their own MECA that says that you're not allowed to work for more than 10 days in a row. So our protection isn't 7 days, so we would be expected to come back to work on the Monday after working the weekend. So we would work a 10-day stretch and then get Thursday, Friday off. And that's expected across all resident medical officers, so all junior doctors, including registrars. I think if you're non-training registrar, as in you're not an advanced trainee, then you're still going to be covered under the same MECA, which means you're still got the same rosters as like a house officer in terms of the hours that you work. Yeah, it's just that the responsibilities, like the jobs for a junior doctor versus a registrar is completely different, but the hours of work are the same.
Yeah, for sure. How did you kind of, just on a side note, how did you find that jump in being a resident and registrar? Like I'd imagine it's quite a big jump.
It was a massive jump because I took a year out as well. I finished PGY2 and then I went traveling for a whole year and just decided to step up as soon as I came back. So after a year of not doing any medicine, I came back to medicine as a registrar. At that point, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even remember how to do venipuncture. Like when you don't practice something for a long time, it just feels very foreign. So I don't think that helped either. It's a bit of a steep learning curve for me. I think it's getting better. It's getting a lot better. That's very nerve-wracking, mostly because you're the one making those management plans in the acute setting. A lot of the time, you just make a call. You just have to trust your own judgment, and patients rely on you, and your team relies on you on that as well. So it's quite a lot of responsibilities on your shoulders all of a sudden. And of course, you've got really, really supportive consultants and supervisors who will happily talk on the phone with me. But often, you make those calls yourself first. Later on, you can discuss those patients with your boss. They're not going to be always there watching over your shoulders, which is something that's quite different from being a resident, where a lot of the time you feel very safe because you always know that you've got a backup, that you can always ask your registrar anything that you're not sure of. It's very easy just to be like, oh, do you mind if I run this past you, sort of thing. Yeah, because a lot of the time it's more non-urgent things rather than acutely sick patient in front of you. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine, the jump is definitely noticeable. From what I've been told, the only way to sort of, I don't know if this makes sense, but like know if you're ready is by moving to become a registrar and then doing it and then becoming ready. Yeah, there's definitely that, sounds like that added weight of responsibility I can definitely appreciate.
Yeah, that's right. You can never be too ready. I'm happy that I've had a relatively soft landing, because I started with general medicine. The support in general medicine is just amazing, and they're known to hold your hand as a registrar to help you through this process.
Yeah, great. I'm glad.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
We'll move on to the next question. Now, this is the juicy part, Adam. You don't have to give us the real answer if you don't want to. You can be quoting from somewhere else. We don't mind that. But I wanted to ask you, what's your annual average salary as a PGY2?
I'm happy to give a pretty indicative figure, which, to be honest, doesn't feel like intrusive, because the work-based agreement based for doctors in Victoria where I work is publicly available. So you can see the base rate that all doctors are paid at, essentially. So for a PGY1, I know that it's roughly 82,000 Australian dollars. And for a PGY2, I think it's something like 86 to 88,000 as the base salary in Victoria. And I know that differs depending on states. Some states have a higher starting salary, some have a lower one. And that obviously is, before tax, not including super, not including overtime. And overtime, you're paid for it, obviously, can change your salary, make it a lot higher.
That's quite a lot of money.
I think in Australia we're pretty lucky. I think we're pretty fairly compensated. I feel very fortunate. As a junior doctor, it could definitely be a lot worse.
In New Zealand, we've got similar numbers, probably a little bit less. This number is the same everywhere in New Zealand, really, if we're under the same mecca. Unless you're working rurally, then that's a bit higher. On average, PGY1, the lowest category, is 70k. So depending on how many hours you're allocated to work, there's Cat A to Cat F. Cat F being 40 hours a week. You're expected to work 60 to 65 hours a week. So that's category A. For someone as PGY1 who's starting in Cat F, working 40 hours a week, you're expected to earn about 70k New Zealand dollars, and that can go up to around 90k if you were working a lot more hours. And that's PGY1. PGY2, it jumps up to 80k as a starting salary, and then it can go up to 100 to 110 for house officers, which is quite good. As a registrar, depending on your experience and how many hours you work as well, the starting salary is 90k, and it can go up to like 200k. So it varies a lot by the amount of hours you work.
It definitely varies depending on how many hours you work. As you get further down your training, once you have general registration, there's the option for doing locum shifts, and that's, I guess, another way to supplement your income as a doctor. But essentially you would be working more hours offered by either your health service or other health services, where you kind of work as a bit of a gun for hire and fill in shifts that need doctors. There's definitely a gradual increase with the more experience you have, so at least you can rely on that with that employee agreement that we have in place.
Yeah, definitely. We're in a very fortunate position compared to a lot of other countries, because I think in the US the starting salary for PGY1s is something like 50 to 70k USD. It's probably still lower than in New Zealand and Australia. We have it pretty good.
Yeah, for sure.
Next question. Would you say you have a good work-life balance as a doctor?
Short answer, I would say yes. I think the asterisk to that is it waxes and wanes, which is pretty natural. Sometimes you're more caught up with work than at other times. But I think the one thing, and this probably goes for anyone that works full-time in general, is that you have to time block things and make space and time for the things you want to be doing outside of work. Generally, I would say that with the hours I'm working at the moment, I'm able to still have enough time to do social and personal things, go do things that I enjoy every once in a while. But I can only imagine that the further you get down your training, the harder it is to kind of maintain that.
I would agree to that, Adam, because when I was a PGY2, I think I said the same thing. I started my YouTube channel at the end of PGY2. I was working very stable hours. Definitely would say that I have a very good work-life balance as well. I think stepping up as a registrar felt like a different game in itself, in that a lot of the times I come back home still thinking about my patients, and just because of the responsibility and that the treatment plans were made by you, I always come home and I find myself on my phone looking up the patient's progress throughout the night. I'm like, oh, did I make the right decision? How are they doing? If something bad happened, then it would sort of stay with me the whole day. So I think, yes, you can have good work-life balance, but mentally it takes up a lot of space for me after work, and it's definitely something I need to keep working on, because I can't just come home and think about my patients, because I want to go about my own life as well. I've been on call this whole week as well, but I haven't been called into work. Thankfully, no one's called in sick, which is really rare in the hospital. So I've had time to catch up with all of my creatives, and it's felt really liberating, feeling that I don't have this fog of constantly thinking about my patients.
I don't think anyone has the perfect answers to it. I think better out with time, probably, but it sounds like a really difficult thing to master. If you're a medical student transitioning to being an intern, even like coming home and being able to mentally switch off after a day, that takes a while to get used to. And I can only imagine, as a registrar, that added responsibility. Yeah, I can definitely appreciate that. I think it's a pretty natural thing.
I definitely think that it comes with experience though. I had the same experience too as a medical student stepping up into an intern role, that I was worrying a lot of the time in the beginning, but as time goes on, when you gain more experience, you're a bit more confident in your own skills, that sort of fades away. Although in saying that, I've got a colleague who is the same age as me. He's just had a newborn, like holy moly, and he's just stepped up as a registrar as well as having a newborn. I was like, oh my gosh, how do you do it? Because he's only getting 2 or 3 hours sleep every day, and I can only imagine that things are really difficult for him. I suppose you sort of just have to adapt as life happens,
Exactly.
And sort of prioritize, see what's really important to you.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Life goes on. Medicine is important, work is important, but you've got to juggle all those other things as well somehow.
Yeah. What are your dreams and aspirations?
Hitting me with the big questions.
Big question.
My dreams and aspirations, probably to be happy, I guess. Career-wise, finding something that in the closest way possible enables me to be happy and live, a somewhat flexible life, in the sense that I'm able to still do the things that I really enjoy, and I'm able to spend time with family and friends, which is really important to me. Ultimately, that would be the dream. If I could, incorporate my passions, interest in medicine and health, and food is something else that I'm interested in. If I could find a way to combine all of those things into a career, I think that would be pretty cool. But I guess that's the dream, that's the aspiration, but still working on how to get there.
That's really cool. And food as well, hey, like nutrition and how it affects sort of lifestyle medicine.
Yeah, for the past few years since my undergrad, I've been really interested in public health, and particularly how our food systems work from a sustainability and a human health perspective. I'd love to explore that further. Finding a way that kind of combines all of those interests, or at least one of those interests, is the goal, but we'll see how we get there.
Yeah, I'm so interested, because I was wondering what made you choose to sort of enroll in the physician training. Where do you think that might lead you in terms of where your big picture game is?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. For enrolling in BPT initially was from the idea that I think BPT is a really good foundation for training, and I think you get a really good breadth of exposure to a lot of different medical specialties, and you really have the opportunity to build your understanding in different aspects of clinical medicine. It's also very patient focused and patient centered, which I like. There are a few different medical specialties that I am interested in pursuing. Whether I do decide to go down and chase those specialty pathways or not, I would love to incorporate that clinical focus with that prevention lens as well. I think a lot of those specialties kind of give you the opportunity to do that.
What specialty would you say in particular that you're sort of looking at?
At the moment, probably gastro is sitting at the top. I think the medicine's super interesting. I love the incorporation with some practical elements as well and some procedural stuff. And also, I guess that there is that kind of slight connection with nutrition and food. And I think that could be a cool area to explore one day down the track. Bottom line is, I find it a pretty interesting specialty.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And would you happen to know sort of what the pathway is to go down for gastroenterology? You're now in basic physician training. How much longer do you think it'll take you?
I think probably a minimum like 4 years after starting basic physician training. There would be sort of your initial year, BPT2 and BPT3, where you sit your written and clinical exams for the college. Throughout that time, doing things to improve your application, like research and getting involved in more gastro stuff to build your knowledge is probably an important stepping stone as well. And then applying to the program involves at the moment a 2-year advanced training program with a year or years after that, which from my understanding is in Australia is increased to a 3-year advanced training program. But I think that would be the case for kind of most medical specialties that you'd approach at this stage in your career.
Yeah, so about 7 years minimum, hey, for gastro.
It seems like a while down the track. Who knows where I'll be in 7 years? But that's it with medicine, right? The journey never ends.
It really is a lifelong learning career. Every step of the way. Medicine is a very, very sort of unique field in that you're always climbing to get somewhere. You also have your own little like quests that you have to do on your own. You're doing your studying after work. You go sit these exams. Life sort of goes on, work goes on. You slowly progress upwards and it's cool. The things that you learn, your knowledge is always evolving. The type of work that you do as well is always evolving. I can't really think of any other career that offers something this varied and diverse, I feel, which I'm very grateful for. I say this because my parents would say, how come you're not a specialist yet? Like, how much longer are you going to need to become a specialist? Yada, yada, yada. But I guess it's harder for the public, or for my parents anyway, to grasp that I do have a job. I do have a relatively well-paying job despite not having the title. The work that I'm doing is very fulfilling despite having the specialist title, which I think a lot of people fail to sort of recognize the growth and how important it is as well of the progress to actually get there. And how valuable it is.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I articulated that
well
enough.
100%. I can definitely relate to all of those things. And I think there's also this kind of feeling, and I feel like with a lot of doctors, in the sense that if I get into this particular specialty, then I'll be happy, then I'll feel like I'm fulfilled and I'll succeed. It's also the expectation of other people as well, that you're working towards this finite goal of becoming a particular specialist in an area, and at that point you have reached some sort of success in your life that important. And no doubt it is. It's absolutely incredible, and specialists are knowledgeable and amazing doctors. But I think there's a lot more to the journey than just the end goal. We can often get fixated on that. But I don't know if I've ever asked you where your interests lie, if you are interested in one particular specialty, or where do you sit?
I'm very interested in skin, so I'm very interested in dermatology. So that's sort of my plan A. I've got lots of backup plans because dermatology is a very competitive specialty to get into. Well, especially in Australia, but in New Zealand as well. I think there's something like 1 or 2 training positions available every 2 years across the whole nation, which is very competitive. But we'll see what happens. A bit like you, I'm open to seeing what comes up for me as well in terms of fulfilling my other interests. I love YouTube. I love digital marketing as well, which is what I did throughout my digital nomad year. And whether or not I can incorporate those things into my career too, I'm not too sure if it will marry up with other specialties. I know dermatology would be one that could marry up, because it's just such a big hype, and skin and cosmetic medicine, that's the trend. But I'm also very open to cardiology, respiratory, gastro as well as something that I'm quite interested in. Sort of medicine that has procedural skills involved too, so that I'm not always just using my brain. No, I'm not that I'm saying that doing procedures you don't need to switch on your brain. You do, don't get me wrong, just because I don't think I'm like very intelligent. I feel like I definitely need to be quite hands-on and give my brain a bit of a break.
I get you. Yeah. I get you 100% in that front. Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything that you wanted to bring up before we close this talk?
I'd just say that, I guess, if you are a Kiwi doctor looking to come to Australia and want to know more about the Australian experience, feel free to hit me up on YouTube or send me an email. Happy to kind of talk it over. You're definitely welcome. It's a great place to live, in my opinion. I'm a bit biased, but yeah. And thanks so much for having me on. It's been great to chat about it.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for agreeing to jump on this video, even though you're on call. I'm very, very grateful for that, Adam. And I'll definitely link Adam's details and his channel in the description below. So make sure you check it out. As always, I'm opening this up to the audience. If you have any questions or further comments, make sure you leave a comment below and I'll answer it. Thanks for watching. See you guys later.